Commander Vexter stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the primitive planet spin lazily on the view screen before him. Blue and green and utterly defenseless, the Krathian Empire had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years, conquering species after species with methodical efficiency, and this latest discovery would be no different. Sensors had picked up the distress beacon from this uncharted system 2 cycles ago, a weak signal from what the natives called Sol System. And what he found made his mandibles click with amusement. The inhabitants called themselves humans, and they were pathetically div-eyed. Vexter's intelligence officers had spent days monitoring their communications, and the reports were almost too good to believe. 190 separate nations on a single planet. Thousands of languages, countless religions, and they still fought among themselves over invisible lines on maps. They cannot even agree on how to measure temperature, the second officer reported. Struggling to contain his laughter? Perfect, Vexter replied, his scales gleaming under the bridge lights. Send the standard ultimatum. The message went out in every human language. Simultaneously, submit to the Krathian Empire or face annihilation. Surrender all weapons and technology, except imperial governance. Resistance would be met with planetary bombardment. Texter expected the usual response from primitives: panic, desperate pleas for mercy, perhaps a few brave but futile defiant speeches from their leaders. Before inevitable capitulation, what he got instead was a single word, transmitted from every nation on Earth simultaneously: no. Vexter blinked his 6 eyes in surprise. The humans had never agreed on anything in their entire monitored history. Yet somehow they all agreed on this. Curious, he muttered, then gave the order to attack. His fleet of 200 warships descended on what human transmissions identified as their military installations, orbital stations around their planet, a small base on their moon, and scattered vessels near the 4th planet they called Mars. The engagement lasted for hours. Vessels fought with primitive chemical rockets and crude kinetic weapons. Their defensive shields flickered and failed under sustained Krathian fire, and their communication channels filled with desperate orders and panicked chatter by the time Vexter's fleet finished the assault. Every human military installation in orbit had been destroyed or disabled. Debris scattered across the void like broken toys. 37 enemy vessels destroyed. 4 orbital platforms eliminated. Lunar base neutralized, his tactical officer reported. Our losses: 2 fighters damaged, minor hull breach on Cruiser 7. No casualties. Vexter allowed himself a satisfied gesture. Another swift victory for the Empire. Another primitive species brought to heel with minimal effort. He prepared the planetary bombardment protocols, ready to eliminate a few major cities as an example. Before accepting Earth's surrender, then a transmission came through from the planet below. It was audio only, no video, and the voice was calm, almost conversational, speaking in what his translator identified as English. Attention Krathian fleet, the human said, as casually as if ordering food at a restaurant. You just destroyed our exploration corps and Coast Guard. The real army hasn't even arrived yet. Vexter's mandibles clicked in confusion. Coast Guard? What was a Coast Guard? His intelligence officer pulled up the translation. A defensive force for protecting territorial waters. They sent their coastal defense force into space, Vexter asked, bewildered apparently so. Commander, his officer replied. Before Vexter could process this absurdity, his sensor officer began shouting warnings. Sir, detecting massive power signatures across the human planet, underground facilities opening, hidden installations activating. The view screen lit up with thousands of new contacts. Weapon platforms that had been dormant suddenly roared to life. Defense grids that his initial scans had completely missed powered up across Earth's surface, and from facilities hidden in mountains beneath oceans, and scattered throughout the solar system. Vessels began launching. How did we miss all of this? Vexter demanded. They were powered down, sir, completely inactive. Our scans classified them as ancient industrial sites or geological formations. More and more contacts appeared on the sensors, and Vexter realized with growing unease that his overwhelming fleet of 200 ships was suddenly outnumbered. New contacts emerging from the asteroid belt, sensors reported. Detecting 70, no, 100. Correction. Still counting. A human transmission came through. Different voice this time, female. With military bearing, this is Admiral Jessica Torres of the North American Alliance Defense Fleet. All Krathion vessels are ordered to withdraw immediately or face destruction. Vexter laughed despite his nervousness. North American Alliance. Our intelligence shows over 50 separate military forces on your planet. You expect us to believe you've unified? Unified is a strong word, Torres replied. And Vexter could hear other voices arguing in the background of her transmission. We're coordinating, more or less. Mostly coordinating. Look, point is, you attacked Earth. And we can settle our differences after we deal with you. Another voice cut into the channel. Speaking accented English, this is Commander Joe of the Eurasian Federation Fleet. Admiral Torres does not speak for us, but in this case, we agree with her conclusion. Leave or die. African Union Fleet confirming engagement protocols. Another voice added. South American Coalition standing by. European Defense Force ready. The transmissions kept coming. Dozens of human military forces, all arguing with each other even as they powered weapons and assumed attack formations. Vexer had never seen anything like it. Most species unified under a single government before reaching space. It was the logical progression of civilization. But these humans operated as a fractious alliance of rivals who somehow coordinated despite constant bickering, sir. They're moving to intercept. His tactical officer warned. Vexter made a quick decision. His fleet still outnumbered any single human force. And primitive weapons could only do so much against Imperial shields and armor all ships. Engage at will. Target the largest human vessels first. The Krathian fleet surged forward. Confident in their superior technology and 3 millennia of military experience, first human salvo struck his forward destroyers. And Vexter's confidence evaporated. The weapons weren't sophisticated energy beams or plasma cannons like civilized species used. They were metal slugs. Simple chunks of matter accelerated to relativistic speeds by what his sensors identified as electromagnetic rails. Projectiles punched through shields that were designed to disperse energy, tore through armor plating like paper, and left massive holes in ships that had conquered 100 worlds impossible. Vexter shouted as a destroyer for simply ceased to exist. Torn apart by a sustained barrage, they're using kinetic weapons at speeds our shields can't deflect, his tactical officer explained. Panic creeping into his voice, then adjust shield frequencies. Sir, shields don't work that way against solid matter. More human weapons. Fire streaked across the void missiles that weaved and dodged with impossible agility. Drones that flew in suicidal attack patterns. And stranger weapons that Vexter couldn't even identify one. Of his cruisers reported being hit by what appeared to be a weaponized cargo container filled with ball bearings. Each tiny sphere moving at orbital velocity, shredding the ship's exterior. What kind of savages weaponize cargo containers? His second officer screamed, the kind Vexter was learning, that had spent their entire history inventing creative ways to kill each other. A human transmission cut through the chaos. Krathion fleet, this is your final warning. Withdraw now. Vexter watched another of his destroyers explode. He had lost 12 ships in as many minutes against an enemy that should have been helpless. Bride, warred with survival instinct, all ships. Retreat to beyond the heliopause. Maximum speed as his battered fleet limped away from Earth. Vexter composed an urgent message to High Command. Request immediate reinforcement. Enemy capabilities vastly exceed initial estimates. Humans are, he paused, searching for the right word, insane behind him. Earth's defenders held position. Not pursuing, but making it clear they could have vanned somewhere on that blue planet. Humans were already analyzing the battle, learning from it, and preparing for round 2. Admiral Jessica Torres sat in the command center, buried 3 kilometers beneath the Rocky Mountains, watching damage reports scroll across her screen while simultaneously coordinating with 17 other fleet commanders who couldn't agree on basic tactical doctrine. The European formation is too tight. Commander Joe complained over the come. It's one good strike and they lose multiple ships. Our formation has survived for continental wars. The European commander shot back. Perhaps you should focus on your own vessels. Both of you. Shut it, Torres snapped. Rubbing her temples, we just kicked alien butt and you're already back to insulting each other. They started it. Joe muttered. Torres wanted to scream. But she had bigger problems than international military rivalry. Earth's defense fleet, hastily assembled from forces that had been mothballed, was a mess of incompatible systems, conflicting command structures, and equipment ranging from cutting-edge to museum-worthy. Her own flagship was 47 years old, built during the last major conflict between nations, when humanity had come terrifyingly close to nuclear annihilation before finally, miraculously choosing peace that had been Earth's longest period without major war. 47 glorious years of nations actually talking instead of shooting. But they never quite trusted the peace to last. Every nation kept their weapons, their armies, their just-in-case contingencies. Unable to quite believe that this time would be different, and thank God for paranoia, Torres thought grimly. Admiral, we're detecting a transmission from beyond the system, her communications officer reported. It's Krathion. And it's not directed at us. Let's hear it. The translation came through moments later, and Torres felt her blood run cold. The fleeing Krathian commander was requesting reinforcements. Massive reinforcements. Describing human forces as unexpectedly advanced and tactically unpredictable. They're coming back, she said quietly. The command center went silent. How many ships can we field if they return in force? General Okonkwo of the African Union asked. Torres pulled up the inventory. We mobilized everything we could reach in for hours. That gave us maybe 30% of Earth's total defensive capability. The rest is still in deep storage or too far out to recall quickly in our deep space expeditionary forces. Someone asked. Torres checked the stellar charts. Humanity had been exploring nearby star systems for 2 decades, sending colony ships, research vessels, military escorts to dozens of locations. The closest expeditionary fleet is 4 weeks away at maximum burn. The furthest are months out, so we fight with what we have. Joe said flatly, we fight with what we have. Torres agreed. The next 47 days were the most intense period of military preparation in human history. Factories that produced civilian goods retooled overnight to manufacture weapons. Shipyards designed for cargo vessels began constructing warships. And garage inventors from every nation submitted designs for weapons that ranged from brilliant to insane. The European Union developed a missile that could split into 17 independent warheads, each with its own AI. The Asian coalition created a railgun that used superconducting magnets to achieve velocities that made previous designs look like toys. The African Union engineered drones that could disguise themselves as debris until they got close enough to detonate. South American engineers invented something they called the Hornets nest, a projectile that released thousands of tiny ball bearings in a spreading cloud. And the North Americans, never ones to be outdone, built a ship-mounted laser that could cut through armor plating like butter. Powered by a reactor that was technically a violation of 3 different international treaties. Are we seriously putting a banned fusion reactor on a warship? Torres asked her chief engineer. Ma'am. The ban was to prevent nations from using it against each other, he replied cheerfully. Nobody said anything about aliens. Torres approved the installation. Meanwhile, across Earth, old rivalries simmered beneath the surface. Cooperation. The Russians and Americans argued about tactics. The Indians and Chinese disputed manufacturing quotas. The Israelis and Arabs maintained tense professionalism while clearly not trusting each other, but they all kept building, kept training, kept preparing. It's like herding cats, Torres complained to her second-in-command. Heavily armed, nationalistic cats who hate each other, but there are cats, he replied. And when push comes to shove, they all love Earth more than they hate each other. Torres hoped he was right. The Krathian response arrived exactly 47 days after their initial retreat. 1,000 ships dropped out of FTL at the edge of the Sol system. A fleet that dwarfed anything humanity had ever assembled. At its head was War Master Thelkai, legendary commander who had conquered 47 species and never lost a single campaign. His reputation preceded him. Ruthless, brilliant, and utterly confident in imperial superiority, primitive world of Earth. His transmission boomed across all frequencies. The Krathian Empire has returned. Your resistance in our first encounter was noted but futile. Surrender now, and your species will be permitted to survive as subjects of the Empire. Torres looked at the tactical display showing 2,000 enemy contacts versus their assembled defense fleet of 800 vessels. The numbers weren't good. This is Admiral Torres. She transmitted back. Keeping her voice steady, your first commander made assumptions and paid for them. You're about to make the same mistake, oh? Thelkai sounded amused. And what assumption would that be? You think you're fighting our real military? Torres said. You're not. These are our reserves. Our local militias. Our weekend warriors. The actual army is still en route? Thelkai's laughter echoed across the channel. Impossible. Our sensors have cataloged every vessel in your system. There is nothing more in our system, Torres agreed. Check your scans again, War Master. Specifically, the outer system approaches. There was a pause, then Thelkai's laughter cut off abruptly. All ships, battle stations. He shouted, and Torres allowed herself a small smile. The expeditionary forces had come home for the past 47 days. Every human vessel within range had been burning hard for Earth. Responding to the emergency recall, colony ships turned into troop transports. Research vessels mounted whatever weapons could be strapped to their hulls. And the military escorts became the core of a returning armada. These weren't planetary defense forces. Designed to fight in familiar space, these were deep space veterans who had lived in zero gravity for years, who navigated by pulsar light, who thought in three-dimensional combat geometry, because up and down stopped meaning anything when you spent months between stars. Captain Sarah Chen had been surveying the third planet of Proxima Centauri when the UHE recall came through. She'd turned her science vessel around, picked up every human in the system. It spent 4 weeks pushing her engines past every safety limit to get home now. She dropped out of FTL right behind the Krathian fleet. Weapons hot. Proxima Expeditionary Force reporting. She transmitted to Torres. Sorry we're late. Traffic was murder. Good to have you. Proxima. Torres replied, unable to keep the relief from her voice. Feel free to make up for lost time. Chen's ship opened fire, and chaos erupted. The Krathians had arranged their fleet to face Earth. Anticipating a defensive battle against a stationary enemy, they weren't ready for attacks from behind. From above, from angles that made no sense in planetary terms, more human vessels arrived. Jumping in from a dozen different vectors, the Tau Ceti fleet, the Barnard Star Expedition, the Wolf 359 colony escort, all converging on Earth from their scattered positions across nearby Space War Master. Thelkai found himself fighting a three-dimensional battle against enemies who moved like they were born in vacuum. Maintain formation, he ordered, trying to consolidate his numerical advantage, but human ships didn't maintain formation. They darted and weaved, each captain making independent decisions, coordinating through rapid-fire communications that sounded more like arguments than military. Disciplined North American vessel. Your trajectory puts you in my firing line, European captain complained. Then don't shoot where I'm flying, came the response. Both of you move. African Union has a clear shot. Nobody has a clear shot if you keep moving around. Then maybe you should move too. The Krathians tried to exploit the apparent chaos, but somehow the bickering humans never actually hit each other while their weapons found Imperial targets with disturbing accuracy. Thelai watched in disbelief as a human cargo hauler, barely armed, rammed one of his destroyers while its crew evacuated in escape pods seconds before impact. They're using civilian vessels as weapons. His tactical officer shouted, Not civilian anymore, Thelkai muttered. Watching the tactical display dissolve into a swirling melee, the humans were adapting in real time, sharing weapon designs across their fleets, modifying tactics on the fly, and generally fighting with a creative chaos that his 3,000-year-old military doctrine had no answer for, and strangest of all, they were playing music loud. Aggressive music that served no tactical purpose except to rattle Krathian nerves. Something called Thunderstruck and Enter Sandman and the Trooper blared across open channels. Can we jam their communications? The Likai asked desperately. That is their communications. Ow. Sir, his officer replied. They're coordinating strikes while playing that noise. Emperor Krazathan sat on his throne, carved from the crystallized core of a conquered world. Watching the battle recordings from Sol System with growing disbelief, his scales, normally a deep purple signifying imperial dignity, had faded to a sickly gray. "Explain this," he demanded, gesturing at the holographic display where human vessels swarmed his crimson armada. Like insects attacking a much larger predator, War Master Thelkai's image flickered in the communication sphere. And the legendary commander looked haggard, Your Majesty. "The humans fight unlike any species in Imperial records," Thelkai began, his voice tight with frustration. "They have no unified command structure. Each fleet operates independently. Sometimes they argue with each other during combat. Then they should be easy to defeat." The Emperor interrupted. "One would think so, Your Majesty," Thelkai replied, "but their chaos is somehow organized. They share information faster than our centralized command can distribute orders, and they adapt to our tactics within minutes." The Emperor leaned forward. "Show me specific examples." Thelkai pulled up a battle. Recording it showed a group of human vessels designated as North American Alliance engaged. With 3 Kratheon cruisers, the humans were clearly outgunned, their shields flickering under sustained fire, and by all tactical models, should have retreated instead. They broadcast a message to what the translator identified as European Defense Force requesting assistance. The European vessels, engaged with their own targets half a solar system away, responded with coordinates and a weapons frequency. The North American ships immediately modified their shield harmonics to match. And when the Europeans fired at extreme range, their weapons passed through the American shields without interference and struck the Kratheon cruisers from an unexpected angle. They shared shield frequencies in the middle of combat, Thelkai explained, modified their defensive systems in real time, and executed a coordinated strike across millions of kilometers without any apparent rehearsal. Impressive, the Emperor admitted grudgingly. But surely our numbers watch this. Your Majesty, the next recording showed a single human vessel, identified as a retrofitted mining ship called the Rusty Bucket. Facing down a Kratheon destroyer, the mining ship had no business in military combat. Its weapons were improvised, its armor was supplemental plating welded to the hull, and its crew of 17 included a cook who doubled as a gunner. The destroyer opened fire. The mining ship's captain did something no military academy would teach. He flew directly at the destroyer instead of away, burning his engines hard. Ignoring the damage his ship was taking, suicidal. The Emperor observed. Wait, Thelkai said at the last moment. The mining ship rolled, exposing its heavily damaged topside while protecting its belly, and fired a single torpedo at point-blank range directly into the destroyer's bridge. Then the mining ship kept going, engines screaming, and rammed the Kratheon vessel amidships. Both ships were destroyed. They sacrificed themselves. The Emperor said no. Your Majesty, Thelka zoomed in on the recording. Look here. 3 seconds before impact, the crew evacuated in escape pods. The ship was on autopilot. The Emperor watched 17 small pods eject from the doomed vessel. Picked up by other human ships minutes later, they calculated crew survival time. Determined they could escape and used their ship as a weapon, Thelka continued. This wasn't desperation. It was tactical mathematics. The Emperor felt a chill run through his scales. Most species fought to preserve their vessels, their technology, their material advantage. Humans fought to win. And everything else was negotiable. What about their weapons? He asked. Surely our technology, Thelkai laughed, and it was not a happy sound, Your Majesty. They're using gunpowder weapons and space combat gunpowder, that primitive chemical propellant. Yes, Your Majesty. They fire metal projectiles using controlled explosions. Some of their boarding parties carry weapons that would be at home in a museum. The recording shifted to show human soldiers breaching a Kratheon vessel. They wore bulky armored suits and carried weapons that spat metal slugs at hypersonic speeds through simple chemical reactions. It was absurdly primitive. It was also devastatingly effective. The Kratheon defenders, armed with sophisticated energy weapons, found their advantage neutralized in close quarters, where human bullets punched through armor and bulkheads with brutal simplicity. They brought knives to one boarding action, Thelka said. His voice hollow, actual knives, sharpened metal. And used them in zero-gravity combat. This is madness. This is humanity, Your Majesty, Thelkai replied. They've been fighting each other for their entire history with escalating weapons of mass destruction. They nearly destroyed themselves at least 17 times by our count. And somehow survived to reach the stars. The Emperor watched more recordings. Human vessels held together with improvised repairs. Weapons that shouldn't work but did. Tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare, and underneath it all, a species that treated existential combat as a solvable problem. How many ships have we lost? He asked quietly. For 173, Your Majesty, Thelkai answered. With another 200 damage beyond field repair, nearly a quarter of the Crimson Armada. Gone against a single planet. Withdraw to Jupiter, the Emperor ordered. Use the gas giant for tactical advantage. I'm sending reinforcements, Your Majesty. Thelkai's voice carried a warning tone. They claim their main military forces haven't arrived yet. Impossible. We've cataloged every human vessel. That's what I said. Your Majesty, Thelkai replied grimly. I was wrong. Their deep space forces returned. What if they're right about this too? The Emperor dismissed the thought the humans were bluffing, trying to compensate for their numerical inferiority with psychological warfare. Ordered an additional 3,000 ships to Sol System. Stripping defenses from a dozen nearby sectors, the Krathian Empire would crush this upstart species and remind the galaxy why they had ruled for 3 millennia. Warmaster Thelkai received his reinforcements and made his stand at Jupiter. Using the massive planet's gravity well to anchor his defensive formation. 5,000 Krathian vessels against humanity's combined fleet of perhaps 2,000. Numbers finally favored the Empire. Then the battle began. And Thelkai realized numbers meant nothing against enemies who refused to fight by the rules human. Ships dove through Jupiter's atmosphere, using the gas giant's weather patterns as cover. Emerging at unexpected angles to strike at his fleet, they weaponized Jupiter's radiation belts. Driving Krathian vessels into areas where sensors became unreliable, they even used Jupiter's moons as shields, playing a deadly game of gravitational slingshot that sent weapons fire on impossible trajectories. And through it all, they broadcast music. Why are they playing that noise? Thelkai demanded as something called Ride of the Valkyries thundered across all frequencies unknown. Sir, his communications officer replied, it serves no tactical purpose, but it did serve a purpose. Thelkai realized it was intimidation. It was a declaration that humanity was so confident they could afford to be theatrical. It was working. His crews were rattled, jumping at sensor ghosts, second-guessing every tactical decision. The battle raged for 6 days. Days of continuous combat in three-dimensional space around a planet that could swallow Earth 1,000 times over. Thelkai adapted, learned, evolved his tactics, but so did the humans. And they learned faster. Every stratagem he employed worked once, maybe twice, before they developed a counter-concentrated fire. They dispersed into smaller groups, dispersed pursuit. They consolidated for devastating Alpha Strike's energy weapons. They modified Shield's kinetic weapons. They used point defense. He tried everything in his 3,000-year military tradition. And the humans met each challenge with improvisation, creativity, and an apparently endless capacity for violence. In the 6th day, Thelkai sat in his command chair and reviewed the casualty reports. 100 ships lost, thousands of crew dead, and the humans were still fighting, still adapting, still broadcasting their defiant music. A transmission came through from Earth. It was Admiral Torres, Warmaster Thelkai, she said. And her voice was tired, but unbroken. You're a skilled commander. I respect that. But you need to understand something about humanity. What is that? Thelkai asked. We don't know how to quit, Torres replied. We'll keep fighting until you leave, or we're dead. And honestly, we're too stubborn to die easily. Thelkai looked at his tactical display. At the scattered remnants of the greatest fleet the Empire had assembled in a century, I believe you, he said quietly, and, for the first time in his long military career, Warmaster Thelkai considered the possibility that he might actually lose. Captain Marcus Webb, watched his fighter's fuel gauge drop toward empty, and made a decision that would have gotten him court-martialed in peacetime. He cut life support to minimal, diverted every available watt to engines, and aimed his tiny vessel directly at the Krathion battlecruiser that had been hammering the civilian evacuation ship's command. "This is Falcon 3, he transmitted, his breath already frosting in the rapidly cooling cockpit. "I'm Winchester on missiles, and my guns are dry, Falcon 3. Pull back to the resupply point." The response came through negative command, Webb replied. "Checking his trajectory one last time. Got 1 round left. And I'm riding it in Falcon 3. Do not." Webb cut the channel and recorded a message to his family. "Hey, Sarah." "Hey, kids," he said, his voice steady, despite the cold. "Daddy's got to do something important. I love you all. Tell Mom I'm sorry I'm going to miss Jamie's birthday. And tell Command to name a crater on that alien homeworld after me." He switched off the recording, locked his course, and initiated the autopilot. Then he climbed into the ejection pod and launched his fighter. Now, an unmanned missile traveling at a significant fraction of light speed struck the Krathion battlecruiser's reactor section. 4 seconds later, the explosion was visible from Earth. 3 days later, Admiral Torres stood at a memorial service for the crew of the destroyer Indomitable, which had been lost. Defending the orbital shipyards, 2,300 people were on that ship now. There was just debris and memories. "We commit their souls to the void," she said, using the traditional spacer's benediction. "And we commit their names to history," the crowd repeated, "their names to history." Torres looked out at the assembled mourners, soldiers, sailors, civilians, representatives from 40 different nations. All united in grief. "The Krathians think they're fighting a divided species," she continued. "They think our arguments make us weak. They think our diversity is a weakness." She gestured at the crowd. "Look around you, Russians standing with Americans, Chinese with Indians, Arabs with Israelis. Every old rivalry set aside. Because we're not Russian or American or Chinese first, we're human. And nobody attacks our home." The crowd roared approval across the solar system. The battle had become a grinding war of attrition. War Master Thelkai had consolidated his forces, abandoned the gas giant positions, fallen back to a defensive perimeter in the asteroid belt. He still had numerical superiority. Barely, but his fleet was battered, and his crews exhausted. The humans somehow kept coming. Their industrial capacity was terrifying. Ships that had been destroyed one day were replaced the next. Weapons that had failed were redesigned overnight. Tactics evolved in real-time. Thal intercepted a human communication that encapsulated their approach. The Mark 7 torpedo failed against their shields, an engineer reported to her commander. "So build a Mark 8. Came the response. "With what specifications?" "I don't know. Make it different. Make it better. Make it work." For hours later, the Mark 8 torpedo was in production. Incorporating lessons learned from the Mark 7's failure, no other species could iterate that fast. Emperor Krasathon, monitoring the battle from his throne world, made a decision. He activated the Imperial Reserve, pulling ships from garrison duties across the Empire. 10,000 vessels began the journey to Sol System. It would take them 2 weeks to arrive. But when they did, humanity would face the full might of the Krathian Empire. Meanwhile, on Earth, something unexpected was happening. The humans, realizing they were in a long-term conflict, had started to organize, not unify, Torres noted with amusement. Organize. There was a difference. The United Nations, previously a talking shop where nations argued about procedure, transformed into a coordination center. The Security Council met in continuous session, managing resources, arbitrating disputes, and somehow keeping 40 different military forces pointed in the same direction. "We need more torpedoes," the American representative demanded. "We need more railgun ammunition," the Chinese representative countered. "Both of you need better targeting systems," the Russian representative interjected, "which we can provide for a price." "Are you seriously trying to profit during an alien invasion?" someone asked incredulously. "Capitalism doesn't stop for aliens," the Russian replied cheerfully, "but I'll give you a discount. 20% off." Torres, listening to the meeting, wanted to scream, but she noticed something interesting. They were negotiating. Trading, making deals. The Americans got their torpedoes by trading. Satellite technology to the Europeans, the Chinese got their ammunition by sharing. Manufacturing techniques with the Africans, the Russians made a fortune selling. Targeting systems, and immediately invested the profits in building more ships. It was chaos, it was inefficient, it was working. We're like an organism. General Okonkwo observed during a joint command meeting, each part doing its own thing, but somehow the whole body functions. A very argumentative organism. Joe added humanity in a nutshell. Torres agreed. The Krathians tried to exploit the apparent disorganization tax. Intercepted messages showing human forces arguing about everything from tactics to resource allocation to who had credit for destroying, which Krathian Shippy launched targeted strikes, trying to cut off forces that seemed isolated or under-supported every time. The bickering humans somehow coordinated a response. It was as if their arguments were a different kind of communication. A rapid exchange of ideas that led to solutions faster than any formal command structure could manage a Krathian. Strike force attacked what appeared to be a vulnerable position held by the Indian Defense Fleet. The Indians called for help. The Pakistanis, or historic rivals, responded immediately. This doesn't mean we're friends. The Pakistani commander transmitted, understood. The Indian commander replied, we'll go back to arguing about borders after we win, agreed together. They destroyed the Krathian strike force. Selkai watched this happen again and again. Old enemies cooperating. Rivals supporting each other. Nations that had fought each other for centuries now fighting side by side. They hate each other, the strategic advisor said. Confused? No, Thelkai corrected. They disagree with each other. There's a difference. They'll argue about everything, but they all agree on one thing. Earth is theirs. And we're not welcome. He pulled up intelligence reports on human history at made for disturbing reading. The species had survived global wars, nuclear standoffs, environmental catastrophes, and pandemics nearly destroyed themselves dozens of times. They'd pulled back from the brink, learned something, and continued. They didn't have the Empire's technological superiority. They didn't have centralized command. What they had was resilience, adaptability, and an apparently genetic inability to give up, sir. His sensor officer interrupted. Detecting new contacts? Human vessels entering the system, more expeditionary forces? Thelkai asked, tiredly unknown. Sir? These don't match any previous configurations. The tactical display updated day. Fleet of vessels unlike anything Thelkai had seen before dropped out of FTL. They were clearly human-built, but purpose-designed for war, not retrofitted exploration ships or modified cargo haulers. These were warships. Real warships, built from the ground up for one purpose, destruction command. This is First Fleet, a new voice transmitted. We received the recall 6 weeks ago. Took us a while to build proper ships. Hope we're not late to the party, Torres. Receiving the transmission, felt her heart lift. First Fleet. You're right on time, she replied. Welcome home. The new vessels moved into formation. And Thelkai realized with sinking certainty that the humans had been telling the truth. All along, everything he'd fought so far. The retrofitted civilian ships, the hastily assembled defense forces, the bickering coalition of rival nations, none of it had been humanity's real military that was just arriving now. Emperor Krazathon watched the latest battle recordings in the silence of his private chambers, his advisors dismissed. Alone with the truth, he could no longer deny the human First Fleet had engaged War Master Thelkai's forces 3 days ago. In those 3 days, the legendary commander had lost another 1,000 ships, not to superior technology, not to overwhelming numbers, but to enemies who fought with a creativity and viciousness that the Empire's 3,000-year military tradition had no answer. Fourth Emperor paused the recording on a particular Sine human vessel. Crippled and venting atmosphere, had broadcast a final message before ramming a Krathian dreadnought. Tell my wife I love her, tell my kids I'm proud of them, and tell command to name a crater on their homeworld after me. The collision had destroyed both ships. Human crew evacuated at the last second, picked up by their comrades, and 3 hours later, The Emperor's intelligence service intercepted a transmission from Earth. They were holding a memorial service for the pilot, and they were, in fact, planning to name a crater on the Krathion homeworld after him, the casual assumption that they would win, that they would reach his homeworld, that they would have the luxury of naming geological features. It was the confidence of a species that had never learned to accept defeat. Emperor pulled up demographic reports on humanity's 7 billion individuals on one planet compared to the Empire's 300 billion across 847 systems, but those 7 billion had mobilized their entire civilization for war in a matter of weeks, every factory retooled, every resource redirected, every citizen contributing to the defense effort. The Emperor's own species would never achieve such unity. The Krathians had grown comfortable in their dominance. Complacent in their superiority, humans had grown up fighting each other and had gotten very, very good at Ida chime. Indicated an incoming urgent transmission, Your Majesty. His military coordinator's voice was tight with stress. We've lost contact with the garrison at Theta Proxima. The Emperor's scales went cold. Theta Proxima is 17 light-years from Sol, he said slowly. How human strike forces, Your Majesty, the coordinator replied. While we concentrated on their home system, they sent raiders into our territory. More reports flooded in over the next hour. Human ships, fast and lightly armed, were hitting Krathion outposts across a dozen systems, not attempting to hold territory. They didn't have the numbers for that. But destroying infrastructure, freeing enslaved species, and generally creating chaos, the Emperor realized with growing horror that humans had studied Krathion military doctrine and identified its fundamental weakness. The Empire relied on overwhelming force. Concentrated at single points, humans were attacking everywhere at once. Recall the reserve fleet, he ordered, Your Majesty. If we recall the reserves, War Master Thelkai will be overwhelmed if we don't recall them. We'll lose half our border outposts, the Emperor snapped. These humans are forcing us to choose between holding Sol System and defending the Empire. He made the call. The reserve fleet, en route to Sol, received orders to divert and protect Imperial holdings. War Master Thelka, learning of the recall, understood immediately what it meant. He was on his own, sir. We're receiving a transmission from the human fleet, his communications officer reported. They're requesting a ceasefire to discuss terms. Thelkai almost laughed, had been expecting a demand for unconditional surrender terms suggested. Negotiation put them through. Admiral Torres appeared on the view screen, and Thelkai was struck by how tired she looked. The humans had paid dearly for their victories. To War Master Thelkai, she began. You're a skilled commander. You've given us a hell of a fight, but you won, Thelka finished. We're winning, Torres corrected. There's a difference, and honestly, I'd rather not keep fighting if we don't have to. The Empire does not surrender. I'm not asking you to surrender, Torres said. I'm asking you to be smart. Your reserve fleet just turned around. You're unsupported deep in hostile territory. And my people are getting creative with their weapon designs again, which frankly scares me almost as much as it should scare you. Thelkai checked his tactical display. He still had 3,000 ships. Against humanity's combined forces of perhaps 4,000, but his ships were battered. His crews exhausted, and his supply lines were 17 light-years long. What are you proposing? He asked. Withdraw from Sol System, Torres said. Take your fleet home. We'll recall our raiders. And we establish a neutral zone between human and Krathian space. The Emperor will never accept such terms, Torres smiled. And it was not a kind expression. Then we'll deliver the terms personally, she said. War Master. We've been fighting for 6 weeks in that time. We've gone from barely functional space travel to building warships that match your technology. What do you think we'll be capable of in 6 months? A year? Thelkai understood the threat humanity was iterating, learning, evolving at a terrifying pace given time. They would surpass Krathian technology. I will present your proposal to the Emperor, he said. The transmission ended, and Thelkai composed the most difficult message of his long career. He explained the military situation with brutal honesty. He detailed humanity's capabilities and their trajectory. He concluded with the recommendation that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. Negotiate Emperor Krazathan received the message and understood that he faced a choice between pride and survival. He chose survival. He dispatched an emissary to Sol System with authorization to negotiate the emissary. A senior diplomat named Kreshtar, who had negotiated treaties with dozens of species, arrived expecting to deal with a unified government instead. He found himself in a conference room with representatives from 40 different human factions, all arguing with each other. The Europeans want territory. Concessions, one human said. The Asians want technology. Transfers, another argued. Africa wants reparations for the destroyed orbital infrastructure. Can we focus? Admiral Torres interrupted. We have an emissary here. 40 pairs of human eyes turned to Kreshtar. The Empire offers peace, he began. Following his prepared statement, withdraw your forces from Krathian space, cease all hostilities, and accept status as a recognized but independent species. No, Torres said flatly. Kreshtar's translator struggled with the abruptness. I'm sorry, no. You attacked us, Torres continued. You destroyed our stations, killed our people, forced us to mobilize our entire civilization for war, and now you want peace on your terms? The Empire is offering you survival, Kreshtar replied, his diplomatic training slipping. We don't need you to offer us survival. General Okonkwo interjected. We've been surviving just fine, in fact. We've been winning. Kreshtar pulled out a data pad and slid it across the table. The Empire spans 847 star systems, he said. You hold one. Do the mathematics. Commander Joe picked up the pad, glanced at it, and slid it back. Your 847 systems are currently dealing with our raiders across 17 sectors, he said. Our one system just defeated your largest assembled fleet in 3,000 years. Do the mathematics. The room went silent. Kreshtar realized these humans were serious. They actually believed they could take the fight to the Empire, and given what he'd seen of their capabilities, they might be right. What do you want? He asked quietly. Torres pulled out her own datapad. Complete withdrawal from human-claimed space, including a buffer zone of 10 light-years, she began. Release of all human prisoners and any species you've enslaved who want to leave. Reparations for the destroyed infrastructure. And a non-aggression pact with verification protocols, enslaved species? Kreshtar repeated. We don't. You have client species under Imperial control who didn't exactly volunteer, Torres interrupted. We've been talking to some of them. They want out. You're going to let them out. The Emperor will never agree to this. Then we come to the Emperor and explain it to him personally, Torres replied. War Master Thelkai is a smart warrior. He knows when he's beaten. Is your Emperor as smart? Kreshtar transmitted the demands to the Emperor. The response took 6 hours in that time. The human delegates argued about everything from the wording of the treaty to who would sign it first to whether they should demand more concessions. Kreshtar watched in fascination as they bickered and debated and somehow reached consensus. The Emperor's response arrived. It was terse. Accepted. Negotiate details. The treaty took 3 weeks to finalize. 3 weeks of humans arguing with each other almost as much as they negotiated with Kreshtar. The final document was comprehensive, carefully worded, and heavily weighted in humanity's favor. The Krathian Empire, ruler of 847 star systems for 3,000 years, had agreed to terms dictated by a single planetan. The day of the signing, Admiral Torres stood on the observation deck of the new space station built from salvaged Krathian technology. She watched the last Imperial vessel cross the new buffer zone and disappear into FTL. We did it, General Okonkwo said beside her. We survived, Torres corrected. Now comes the hard part. What's harder than fighting off an alien invasion? Torres gestured at the view screen, where diplomatic channels were already filling with arguments between nations over how to divide the salvaged technology, going back to being ourselves. She said Dokro's Earth. The unified war effort was already fragmenting.